Occasionally, I like to take a break from filmmaking and go out and take some photos. Just something about the photography process is so therapeutic for me. Of course though, I would never leave to take photos without my dedicated photo camera, which happens to be the Fuji X100s. That figures. Oh, that so figures. Fridges, man. Gotta love fridges. Now this camera certainly isn't new, it's going on about 8 years old, but in this video I want to talk about why I still use it and why it changes the way I approach photography. Reason number one, optical viewfinders are superior. Now on paper the electronic viewfinder seems like it would be a lot better. After all, it shows you exactly what the image is going to look like before you even take it. That means that you don't have to expose a bunch of shots and check to see if you got the exposure correct. But I want to argue that optical viewfinders are actually a lot better when it comes to how you approach photography. And what this ultimately comes down to is a process I like to call visualization. Visualization is the process of taking something that's in your head and expressing it through a medium. You experience visualization right before you take every single shot. Because an electronic viewfinder shows you an exact representation of the image that you're about to produce, it robs you of the additional steps of the visualization process that occur after you put the camera to your eye. An optical viewfinder doesn't tell you how to expose your image. It doesn't even show you what your depth of field is going to look like. You have to be able to picture these things on your own and know how to execute them using the proper tools. Now I want to explain really quick that the Fuji X100s actually has a very unique hybrid viewfinder that almost no other camera has. Essentially inside of this viewfinder is an optical viewfinder that allows you to see directly through it and a tiny screen that you can toggle with this switch right here. However, because this camera is really old and electronic viewfinders weren't very good at the time that this camera was made, it's garbage and it's honestly kind of unusable. What this does is it basically forces you to use not only an optical viewfinder, but a rangefinder optical viewfinder. Now, the second reason why this camera changes the way that I approach photography is because of its fixed prime lens. Now, what a prime lens is as opposed to a zoom lens, this only has one focal length, which means that I can't zoom it to get closer to my subject. I have to effectively work the scene with the lens that I have. Sometimes when working with a zoom lens, a photographer might be tempted to not move from any given spot, but rather just zoom to frame the subject the way that they want. There isn't anything necessarily wrong with this, but it might not lend itself to the best creative choice in any given situation. Also, the practice that you get from this kind of exercise lends itself to using zoom lenses more intently. Reason number three. It's just a pure photography experience. This camera literally takes away any excuses you might be making as a photographer. Because it's so simple and because the lens is fixed, you're never really wondering what it would be like if you had a longer lens. However, for me, this isn't even a limitation that I really think much about. Because it's the only option, I work with it willingly. Another thing I like about this camera is the field of view of this lens. Because it's a 35mm equivalent, it's really close to the human eye, which means as soon as I put it up to my eye, I'm basically seeing the same shot that I saw before I even pulled the camera out. Now this has a really unique effect because the field of view that I'm used to seeing on a daily basis is the same field of view that I'm capturing in my images, which makes me somehow more aware of compositions in everyday life. Now, something I do to make this camera a quote-unquote pure photography experience is limiting features like the rear LCD screen, for example. I actually keep this turned off most of the time, which forces me to use the optical viewfinder. Choosing not to use things like the rear screen, EVF, or any auto modes makes me a more active photographer. I use the camera's built-in light meter to expose all of my shots, which makes me very intentional about what I'm deciding to expose my image on. Have you ever had to think about what part of the scene to expose your image for? If not, then the convenience of digital photography has robbed you of an opportunity to be creative. The main point I want to make with this video is that the longer your creative process is, the more opportunities you have to be creative. That's one of the reasons why I like this camera so much. Because of its limitations, it changes the way I approach photography. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm telling you to run out and buy this camera. Even though you can find these cameras pretty cheap on eBay, a lot of the points I brought up in this video can be applied to the camera you already have. For example, relying on prime lenses and restricting your use of auto modes. Both of these things can make you a more active photographer. Anyways guys, that about does it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.